If you've ever done research on how to cast better, you'll be acquainted with our guest today. It is John Holden. John lives in the United Kingdom, was a biomedical scientist by training, and somehow ended up as a tackle development consultant for brands like Penn, Fenwick, and Stren. More about that in a bit. He's also written extensively for Sea Angler magazine, has been featured on U.S. television and magazines such as Saltwater Sportsman, and has written the books Long Distance Casting and CT Reel Tuning. These, by the way, are available at his website, johnholden.co.uk. His YouTube channel, John Holden, is actually linked on our own Carolina Surfcasters Association YouTube channel. Check it out. His advice for surf fishermen is abundant, but he's here today to give us his thoughts on specifically tournament casting. Thank you to John Holden for showing up here today and really for having the track record of being very forthcoming with all the knowledge he has developed over the years in the area of long-distance casting. John, before we start, I met a gentleman at a recent tournament who frequently fishes the Outer Banks and Hatteras for the Red Drum. And he was saying that he met you on those beaches actually back in the 1980s. So I was hoping you could indulge our local audience here in North Carolina and briefly tell us a little bit about the time you spent on the Outer Banks and Hatteras. What brought you here, what you were up to, your impressions?
Well, I came to Hatteras because initially Penn invited me over to do some work on their reels, and they said go down to Hatteras, base yourself there, and you can do some fishing and you can do the reel development there, and all will be well. And so that's where I went, and I went there many times, and it was quite magnificent, because ever since I was a baby, I thought, how can I get to America and fish the Outer Banks? And I couldn't think of a way of doing it. And of course, it came out of the blue. It just happened. It was circumstances were just right, and I came across. And I won't go into the full story, but it all started because I answered a letter from a fella in Philadelphia who wanted to know about reels. And of course the Penn Reel factory is in Philadelphia. So I wrote to him and said, this is what you need to do to make your reel better. You need to get this spare part, which was from a different reel, and put it in your reel. And as luck would have it, he went to the Penn factory, to the spares department, on a lunchtime when everyone had gone away except the owner of Penn, Herbert Hensey. And he said to this guy, what do you want these bits for? And he explained it. And the next thing I'm on a plane to Philadelphia to talk to Penn. So how does that one work out? I don't know. I don't know what it is. Fate, I suppose. And from there to Hatteras and fishing and casting and so forth, and it was really good. Yeah, really good, and I enjoyed my time there. I went to other parts of America as well, because with Woodstream and Fenwick, of course they're in Los Angeles and up in Seattle, so there was a lot of travelling, but Hatteras was the place because, being a surf fisherman, you want to go to the Outer Banks, and that's how it all happened.
That's interesting. So you're saying that Hatteras and the Outer Banks were that well known as a surf fishing destination?
In this country, the Outer Banks were. Whether Hatteras itself was, I don't know. But the Outer Banks, it was just. I used to read lots of stuff in American magazines, oh no, outdoor sports and saltwater sportsmen and things like that. And if it wasn't surf casting, it was duck hunting or, or whatever. And it just seemed to be, if you're going to paradise, go to the Outer Banks. And that was it for me.
Now, to set up a little bit of context, what's your tournament casting story? How did you get started? What are some of your accomplishments?
Well, I was. It came from fishing. Where I live, the main species is cod, or it was cod. They've all gone now. Now, to catch cod, you had to cast a long way, and I couldn't. So I read all the magazines and the books, and I thought I'll try this. So I got a rod and a reel. There was a field full of cows in just over the fence from my house, so I played around in there, and I wasn't really getting anywhere until one day, and I don't know why, but suddenly I could cast. Everything kind of came together, and I was casting okay, and the distances went up from, I don't know, 200 or 300 feet to 500, 600 feet, and it happened over, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And then I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. And I read somewhere in one of the angling papers that the British record was about 500 feet at the time. So I thought, well, that's all right, I'll have a go at this. And in 1969, I went in for the British Championships and I won that. And that's really what kicked it off.
And you were the first caster in the UK to cast over 600 feet in a tournament, correct?
200 yards, 600 feet, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We still talk yards and meters over here, but I'll convert to feet as we go along. So yeah, so it was about it was about 600 feet. But to be fair, there were 3 or 4 of us who were casting more or less the same. One being Terry Carroll, who started the Ziplex company. So it's hard to say who was officially first, but we were all there or thereabouts. And of course, that's when tournament casting started to expand rapidly. And the rest is history, I suppose.
So you are still, at the very least, an observer of the sport. How do you feel tournament casting has changed from 40 plus years ago to today? And I remember in a recent correspondence that we had, you used the phrase victim of its own success. So please explain that as well.
Okay. Now, when I started tournament casting, it had been running as a sport in this country, as indeed it had been in your country, for many years, but it had become elitist and people couldn't see any connection with fishing. And so when my generation of casters came along, we were fresh from the beaches, we came onto the field, we beat everybody else, and so we brought with us a very big audience of people who were fishermen who were suddenly interested in learning to cast better. And so we progressed through the 80s, 90s, probably somewhere around the start of the millennium. by which time the distances had gone up so high, you were talking 900 feet, it was again elitist. To give you a kind of idea of that, you're driving a regular truck, right? And you go to Indianapolis and you see the race cars. You can't see any correspondence between what they're doing and what you're doing when you drive. It's just, it might as well be in outer space. It's too much, it's too far. That's where we've got to here. As a result of that, the number of people tournament casting has fallen to, I don't know, I think you've probably got 50 or 60 at most. But they're all really, top casters. It's elitist. That's what's done it. So I learned a lesson very early in my career. When I started doing demonstrations and teaching, I went onto the beach and I'd cast as far as I could. And people said, "Oh, that's really good." And after 2 or 3 casts, they said, "Well, I'll never be able to do that." So it's a big turn off. So at that point, I thought, well, no, this isn't going to work. I'll show you how to cast 400 or 500 feet easily with regular fishing tackle. And that's effortless, or at least it was effortless for me because I was casting so much further when I really tried. So I was at very low cruising speed, if you like. But people looked at that and they said, well, that doesn't look very difficult. I could do that. And that's when they start trying themselves. And suddenly you get this mass of people all wanting to learn to cast. Most of them very happy to be, if they got anything over 300 feet, they were happy. But a few of them thought, "Oh, I like this, I'm going to do it more seriously." And that's where the tournament casting grew, because those people then came to tournaments, and we would have 100, more than that, entrants to a competition. You had to stand all day to have 1 or 2 casts. It got that crowded at one time. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people who came to watch. And now, as I say, you've got the tournaments they have, you've got a handful of people there, nobody comes to watch. So what it needs is another injection of new blood, and that's really where we need to start working.
So do you think that was inevitable, that a certain class of caster would arise and kind of co-opt the sport to where beginner casters would be, look at it and be intimidated? Is that just the natural course for any sport, do you think?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. That's a very good analysis. The difference perhaps with casting and a lot of other sports is, well, let's say tennis. You have the open tournaments such as Wimbledon and the rest of it. They're the elite people. But that doesn't stop the interest lower down. People play tennis in their backyard quite happily. But you don't get that with casting. It's either you're fully on or you're not in it at all. And one bad aspect of that now is that we've got lots of people who go beach fishing who don't know about casting. I mean, that sounds really stupid, but that's the reality of it. They don't know. And if they try to find out, they look at a tournament result and they say, "Oh, that's no good. I could never do that. I don't think I'll bother." But if you say to them, "Well, look, bring your rod to the beach. We'll have half an hour and we'll do a bit of casting, and you'll be able to cast a lot further than you do now." They think, "Oh yeah, that's all right," and they go for that, and they're very happy. So that's what we have to do. We have to start building again. Oddly enough, you had the same situation in America in the 1930s, all the way through to the 1950s. You had some very serious casters on the East Coast and the West Coast. They did things very differently. They didn't really interact with each other very much. But certainly on the West Coast, tournament casting was a very serious game, very popular game. And it ended with your best caster, that will be Primo Livigny. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yes.
Yeah. He cast 810 feet in 1952. That was all forgotten. It became tiny sport again because the man on the beach didn't see the relevance. That's if he knew about it at all. So that's kind of what you're up against.
Now, as we get into the more technical subject matter, you'd probably agree that we should add a disclaimer. You have an abundance of articles, videos, books, podcasts out there to instruct the average surf fisherman who wants to catch more fish by means of casting further. And if such a person is watching this video, I'd refer them to all the other materials that you've produced. What we wanted to address here today are your ideas on modern tournament casting. On the field, no hooks, no bait, no fish. So there might be some advice and guidance that comes up in this conversation that might actually be detrimental to the average surf fisherman. So that said, John, we'll start with a very general question, assuming that any tournament caster, someone who's at that level, will already be familiar with all your other work. What rules of long-distance surf fishing fly out the window when you step onto a tournament court? What's different?
Your technique will be different. It will be whatever technique you use on the beach, you can extend it into new areas when you go onto grass. Obviously you haven't got bait and all that kind of thing, but very fundamental things that if I tried to do a big cast on the beach, I'd fall over because I'm fishing on sand or stones. I just can't, I haven't got a solid enough foundation to wind up a really big cast. So that's one of the things. The rod will be different. I would not dream of fishing with a tournament rod. It would be awful. I like to fish with a fishing rod, which is softer, shorter, whatever. Other than that, in concept, it's not very different. One is an extension of the other. It's not two separate things in that to cast well, you must master basic steps. Without them, you're not going to get anywhere. Those basic steps are the same whether you're on a beach or on a field. The big difference is that on a field, I can build on it a lot more. I can extend things, I can put in a lot more power. I can use different tackle. I would tune my reels a bit differently and so forth. That's really the only difference. And things like line diameter, I wouldn't want to fish necessarily with the same thin lines that I'm using on a tournament court. But other than that, the things are, just one's just kind of grows into the other.
Right. So let's get a little bit more granular at this point. What can you tell a beginning or intermediate tournament caster about finding the right casting style? And how do variables like strength or stature figure into choosing a go-to casting style?
Okay, well, that is the most important question of all. And I'm glad you've asked that, because everything really comes down to that issue. The tendency is to think, well, if I'm casting reasonably well, I need a better rod, I need a faster reel, I need all of that kind of thing. And most people tend to pick a style of casting that they see other people use, rather than think it through for themselves. So let's put all of that to one side and go right back to fundamentals. It's all about generating power. You generate power in two ways. You have the rotation of your body, and you have the explosive arm action at the end. Are making sense so far?
Yes.
Right. Let's do a comparison there with athletics. The body action is what discus throwers use. It's a long sweep of the body, big rotation. The explosive power is what you use when you're doing the shot put. So it's all from there, with not so much turning of the body. So everybody has got those two abilities, but in some people, one of those is more dominant than the other. You do one of them better because you're naturally built to do it in a lot of cases. So I get my power from body rotation. Other casters don't use much body rotation. They rely on the shoulder and arm action at the end. So the first thing you have to do, if you're serious about maximising your cast, is to find out where your strengths are. Which one am I going to do? Am I going to be a body rotator, or am I going to be a hitter? Or can I do both? But usually one dominates over the other. That sets your style. If you're a body rotator, you're going to be you can cast off the ground, and you can do pendulum techniques, but it won't be in the same way that the more explosive caster sets up his style. He can do pendulum, he can do ground casting, but he can't do it the same way as you do because he hasn't got enough rotation. I use a very, very long arc, power arc, very long. Other people use a short, vicious one. So you have to know which one's best for you. And that's why when you're getting into casting more seriously, you mustn't copy somebody without first thinking about, have I got the same physical characteristics of him. Take an extreme example, Danny Moscops. You know Danny Moscops, the Belgian fella, the caster that holds all the records.
Yes, of course.
You know about him, don't you? World champion many times. In this country at least, people try to copy Danny. They get the same rod that Danny uses. It's a century rod. I can't remember the model number, but anyway, they get a rod like Danny's, they get a reel like Danny's, and they try to cast like Danny, and they can't. Because Danny was a power lifter. Danny can pick up the back end of an automobile. They haven't got his power. It's no good trying to copy him, but that's what they do, and that's why they struggle. That's an extreme example, but it happens even at club level. You see that the people in your casting club who do best, and you try to copy them. If you're not built like them, if you don't have their strength, it's not going to work. So as soon as you start to think, I want to learn to cast better, you must find out what your strengths are. Are you going to be a big turn? Are you going to be a late hitter? Are you going to do a pendulum? Are you going to do an off-ground? Whatever it's going to be. Now, does that make sense to you? Have I explained that okay?
That's sort of, yeah. And that sort of leads me into another question I had. So I'll start here. There are a few tournament casters out there who film themselves, sometimes in slow motion, so that they can go back and later study that footage and look for areas of improvement. One thing I personally obsess over is looking at the rod action during my cast when I do filming like that. Now, you're talking about a rotator versus a hitter. I have noticed that when I rotate quickly, the rod loads and then releases sooner in the cast, whereas what I'm usually shooting for is a lockup of the rod later on in the cast, like in the middle of the punch-pull. And I've also noticed that one way doesn't necessarily cast further than the other. If I'm using a rod that kind of fits into the middle ground in that spectrum. So you have me wondering, what's your take on that?
Well, let's pick up from where I left off. We've decided by trial and error, usually, what kind of caster we're likely to be. Let's say we're going to use a fairly long length of rotation, and we're going to hit it fairly hard at the end as well. So we've got the best of both worlds, right? So let's think we're going to need a style to do that. And we decide that we like pendulum casting. So we've got to find a way to do our pendulum cast that allows us to use that natural body action we've got. Right? Now, when you see people learning to pendulum cast, again, they copy. They say, well, that person, he's doing okay. He uses that much leader drop. He swings it at that angle out. He brings it back to there, and then he does his cast. That may or it may not work for you. I found out a long time ago that it's much better, although it takes longer, to work out what is best for me. So when I do my pendulum action, I swing out at a certain angle. Doesn't matter, it's my angle. I bring it back at a certain angle. And what have I achieved? I've achieved some very important things. First off, when that sinker comes back to the point where I'm going to start the power arc, my rod is in the right place, I'm in the right place, and the sinker is in the right place. Because I want that sinker to do two things. The first thing I want it to do is provide some resistance, so that immediately I start moving into the cast, the rod has got something to pull against. I don't want loose things happening here. I want it to be tight from there. I don't want it to be too tight. I don't want it to be too heavy. I want exactly the right amount of resistance for me. So that as I take up with the rod and the rod starts coming round and the sinker starts moving, the leader and the sinker follow the rod properly. I'm not in a situation where the rod's moving through one plane and the sinker's trying to go off in another direction. I want everything to come round in unison. And I want that to continue all the way through to the final stage of the cast where I put the arm action in. So everything I do on my pendulum is aimed at creating exact conditions so that I get the best out of my body action. All the power I'm developing is being used properly. It's not being wasted. You go to the next stage from that. I need a rod that lets me do that. Now suppose I get a very stiff rod like a lot of the tournament casters use these days. I do my big pendulum, I start moving down. The rod is so stiff I can't handle it. The leverage works against me and the rod isn't storing energy properly because it's not bending enough. What I need is what today would be called a soft action. I want that rod to bend like a bow, and I want it to keep bending and loading all the way round until I reach the point in the cast where my arms are going to work. Yeah? And at that point, I want the rod to be so bent that it becomes stiff. It doesn't want to bend anymore. It tightens right up. It's like drawing a longbow. You get to the point where you can't pull it any further. That's the equivalent stage that I need when my arms do the final push and pull, because then I'm using solid leverage. If you gave that rod to one of the casters that just relies on a big hit, he'll say, "This is too soft. I can't do anything with it. It's not working." He needs a rod that the stiffness is built in. So with my style of casting, I put the stiffness into the rod, if you like, so that it's ready for me to hit at the end. Whereas another caster who doesn't have the big wind up needs the stiffness in the rod already so that he can get on and give it a real good hit. That's the difference. So that's what you have to work out. So when someone says, what kind of rod do I use? What do I need? You say, you need a rod that matches your technique. Not a rod that everyone else wants to use, not a rod that the advertisers say you must have. You want the rod that works for you. And the best way to find out all these things is to begin with a very ordinary rod. Just go into the tackle shop, find a surf rod, just an average 12, 13 foot, I don't know what you have over there. Nothing special. Ideal, it's better if it's too soft than if it's too hard. The last thing you want is a rod that's too stiff for you. A soft rod, fine. It lets you learn the technique, it lets you feel what's happening. You might only be casting with it for a couple of months until you get used to the technique, and then you think, well, yeah, I know how to do my pendulum now, I know how to wind up, everything's going fine until I get about halfway round in my power arc, and then the rod, it just hasn't got enough strength. The rod's not stiff enough. I need another rod. And when you go to the tackle shop next time, you know what to look for. You think, I want a rod with more stiffness in the middle, at the butt, whatever it might be for you. That's how you build up your casting. So you start with something very ordinary. There's the average surf rod. I don't know what about America, but here, if you go into a tackle shop, there's surf rods from about $100 upward that will all do a good job. Lots of them will cast 600 feet or more. Same with reels. You can get a standard reel off the shelf and it'll cast 600 feet and more. All you have to do is fill it with line, put a drop of oil in the bearings and away you go. You don't need to do anything more. You don't need to tune it. You don't need to do anything. It's not until you get the other side of 650 feet that you need to start thinking a bit more about customised tackle. And really, it's a good thing when you're starting to forget about all that complication. Get something simple. Learn to feel what's happening. Find out what your technique has got to be so that you can generate your power and you just work from there on.
Yeah, and that is really eye-opening. And just to sum it up in a few words, what it sounds like you're saying is that if you're more of a rotational caster, you'll be leaning towards a rod that's a little bit slower in action, more parabolic. If you're more of a big hitter late in the cast, then that's when a faster action rod is going to be optimal?
Yes. And since most people are a combination of rotate and hit, then you will end up with certainly while you're learning, you want a kind of a moderately quick taper, not too stiff in the handle, just a rod that's easy to use. Let's look at it from the point, this is a situation you're in with a lot of casters now. Let's look at archery, right? You think, okay, you're going to go learn archery. And you go along and the man says, here's a bow. It's got a draw weight of 150 pounds. It's a really strong hunting bow. What do you think of that? And you can't move it. You can't even bend the damn thing, right? For target archery, most adult men are happiest in the sort of 40, 45 pound draw weight, which doesn't sound very much. When you start, if you've never shot a bow before, you will have a job to draw it back, never mind control it. So when you learn archery, they'll start you off on a bow that might be 20 or 25 pounds draw weight, because you can draw it, you can pull it easily, and you can therefore control it. Control is the key word, whether it's archery or casting. You must be able to control the rod. So you start with something, a rod that's, let's say it's a rod with a low draw weight, to use the archery connection. You start with that, and you learn, and you think, I need something a bit more than this. So you go find another rod, a stiffer one, a draw weight that's higher, but you can still control it. And then as you practice more and you improve, you think, I need something. Not only do I need more draw weight in this, but I'd like it to be a bit quicker at the top end and really stiff at the butt. Or you might say, I want more of a parabolic action. You'll know what you want. See, one of the strange things in casting is that when you learn a good technique, when your level of expertise rises to a certain level, all of the big questions that worry people when they start either disappear or they answer themselves. So you don't have to agonise, do I need a 12-foot rod? Do I need a 14-foot rod? You know, I can't handle a 14-foot rod. I like a 13-foot rod. I know that through experience. That's what you need, experience. And experience takes time and effort. And that's another factor that you need to build in. You need to have realistic expectations. I don't mean low expectations. I mean, you've got to be realistic on what you can achieve. You might not have time to do lots of practice. Other things are going on in your life. You might think, well, I haven't got the talent. To reach the top takes not only hard work, but this elusive talent thing. If you've got it, that's fine. If you haven't, there's no point making yourself unhappy. Enjoy what you can do. Be the best caster you can be with your physique, your technique, your time. Just enjoy it. That's the way forward. Because it doesn't matter how good a caster you are, even if you get right to the top, someone's going to come along and beat you. So there's no point getting paranoid about it. And, you know, life isn't fair, Matt. You go onto your field 5 nights a week and you cast and you cast and you cast and you put in a massive amount of effort and you cast whatever it might be, and you think, this is all right. And then someone will come along and say, what are you doing? And you say, well, I'm casting. Can I have a try? Well, okay, have a try. And, oh, yeah, this is easy enough. And within a couple of weeks, he's casting 50 feet further than you. It's not fair, but it's what happens. You know, live with it. Because someone's going to come along and cast 50 feet further than him. And that's called progress. Like it, enjoy what you're doing. Stay relaxed. Don't get too carried away with equipment and everything. Just find out what works for you. Learn to do it properly. Relax. And, you know, just go with it and you'll be fine.
Now, this is just a small technical thing I was interested to get your opinion on while we're on the subject. I have noticed, and you probably have as well, that a lot of the elite casters are moving their reels from the low reel position on the rod to the traditional high reel position on the rod, where they're controlling the reel with their right hand. I've tested this for myself. I hit bigger distances with low reel casting personally. Others swear by the opposite. What do you make of the high reel trend in tournaments now?
Well, I think people have, argued about this one for as long as I can remember. It doesn't seem to matter very much. It's what works for you. It's another one of those, you've got to work it out for yourself. What you can say is that if you've got a rod that is a little bit too stiff for you, if you move the reel down to the butt, you alter the geometry and the dynamics of the rod so that it will react and feel softer and therefore nicer for you to use. Opposite to that, if you've got a rod that's slightly soft and you've got the reel at the bottom and you move it up, that will make it feel stiffer, and that might suit you. But really there's not much in it. There's not much in it. It's whatever suits you. I think... Sorry?
No, I apologize. Go ahead.
I think it's one of these topics in casting where people tend to get a little bit overcomplicated. They try to overanalyze. You can work it out. You can do mechanical drawings as to what's happening in the rod and the reel and whatever. But you can do it much more easily on the personal level, which is all that counts. Put your reel at the bottom, try that, put it up, try that. Which one do you like? Well, I like that one. Okay, do that. Simple. Answered your own question. If you're casting okay and you've got a nice smooth technique, you can use either. You'll prefer one, but certainly when you're fishing and using a fishing rod, which is not as extreme in design as a tournament rod will be, you can put the reel where you like. Reel up, reel down. I mean, I don't particularly like fishing with the reel at the bottom in some circumstances because it's awkward. I'd rather have the reel up. It makes no difference to the casting. If you put me on a field with a casting rod, I'm going to have it at the bottom because that suits me better. That's all there is to it, really. It's not one of those things that you need to be overly concerned with. There's bigger issues. It's like the whole thing of reel tuning. Do you go out and buy ceramic bearings, and do you need a new magnet system, and do you need a different frame? Maybe it'll help. If it makes you feel better, do it.
Now, of course, you have a whole book called CT Reel Tuning, which even covers advanced tournament reel tuning. So we're not going to get into tuning. That would probably be a 4 or 5 hour conversation. But what would you say the necessary features are that someone would want to look for on a tournament multiplier, aka baitcaster reel, if someone's serious about being competitive?
A tournament reel. Okay. I think the first thing to do is to have had enough experience on a fairly standard reel so that you understand what tournament customised reels can do for you or not. I don't think it's a good idea to go straight for an advanced reel. One, because you might not need it anyway, and secondly, because they do take an awful lot of setting up. Some of them, they have to be, they need tuning up and looking after and so forth. I've always used standard reels. I've used the Tuers 7HT for years. I'm talking about the very basic model with the centrifugal brake blocks. I'm quite happy with that. I use the others, of course. I use the mag reels and so forth. They're all nice. If you need something more advanced, then of course you've got to start thinking about the frame in particular. You need a good solid frame. It might pay you to get one of those because some reels do twist when you put a lot of force into them. Make sure you've got a good spool and a magnet that works for you. There are several reels kicking about. Tuers 7HT is fine for me. I use, I've got one or two Abus and so on. They're all more or less standard reels, so I haven't done anything with bearings or the bearings that came from the factory. I've tried ceramic bearings and the rest, and they're fine, but I don't get any great advantage out of them. If I was tournament casting still, yes, I'd go that route. But I've done a lot of testing on these things, just as a rough idea. If I change from standard bearings to ABEX 7 bearings, I get about 15, 20 feet more. That's it. So if I was tournament casting, yeah, I'll have that. If I'm fishing or just practicing on the field, can't be bothered. I might as well stay with the standard bearings. Magnets, that's the game. Find one that suits you. But I do have to say that a lot of the tuning problems disappear if you improve your technique and maybe change your rod action a bit.
Right, to be more suitable to the styles you were referring to?
Yeah, but and again, going back to going back 30 or 40 years, we use very simple reels. Now, people find it hard to believe that you could get, the Surf Masters or the Squidders, and you just put a drop of oil in the bearings and you make the cast and you don't touch that reel at all from the moment you let go until the sinker hits the field. You don't have to do anything. Everything is dead smooth. It's not like today where you've got to tighten your magnets down in order to launch the cast, and then you've got to back your magnets off so that the spool flows more freely at the other end. A lot of that comes down to rod design and the kind of techniques they use these days. And so, of course, if you're going to do that, then that's what you have to do with your magnets. But it always seems to me a bit self-defeating. If I've got to have very high magnet power to make the cast launch cleanly, that's the same as trying to accelerate my car away from a standing start with the parking brake on. Why am I doing that? Why am I wasting all this power against all of my power by letting the magnet impose such a heavy force, when if I change my technique a bit, I wouldn't need that heavy magnet pressure and I could just let things flow? It's a possibility. And again, when you go back to the older casting techniques, more body rotation, softer rod, that helps you a lot. Actually, I know it's controversial, but one of the big limits now in tournament distance is the reel, the design of the spool. I think we've reached the end point of what this, over here we call them the 6,500 type spool, being, the Abu's original spool, the widest ones that they've got in the Achios reels. Everyone's got them in the bait casters. Fairly wide, fairly shallow spools. The ones we all use. They've been rejected twice over the years by tournament casters. They were rejected in the 1920s and the 1930s in favour of a narrower but deeper spool. In America, the people on the West Coast, Primo Livinay and his people and his colleagues, they rejected our popular spool format as well. They said it was just inefficient. They use reels which are much wider diameter, narrower, and they proved to themselves that these were far more efficient. Now, I was extremely fortunate in being able to try one of those reels, and it was exceptionally efficient. It was really good. It was quite difficult to get your thumb round it to start with because it sat so high. But as with the Surf Masters and squidders we used over here, once you let go, you did not have to touch that spool. It just ran all by itself very happily. And I think when we get some, when we get the next breakthrough in reel design, it will be to do with spool format. I think we're going to go to a deeper, narrower spool, and I think that will add quite appreciably to distances.
Well, this has been an excellent conversation, and before we part ways, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to address, that you think should be?
Not really. I just think that I think it's time that the ordinary people on the beach were drawn in again. I think there's a lot of people out there do need some help, and of course people who can cast well are the right people to help them. And I think if just on occasion, if you can do seminars and things with people on the beach, all informally, I think that's the way not only to get to be of great value to those people, but also it'll expand your sport as well. But if there's one final thought, I suppose, it's whatever you do, just enjoy yourself.
All right. johnholden.co.uk is his website, and you can also look him up on YouTube. Maybe type in John Holden casting, and should be right at the top.
Yeah, just put my name in. Yeah, that'll do it. Any of you is always welcome to contact me anytime, which you can do through the website or whatever, and I'll certainly try my best to answer any questions you might have. So just feel welcome to do that.
Well, John Holden, from myself and from all your friends and fans here in the United States, you have our gratitude.
All right, thank you. That's nice talking to you.